Hello, and welcome to the first session in our new webinar series at Hope Community Capital. We're thrilled to have you with us today for Capital Alignment Before You Say Yes to the Money. I am Jana Woodhouse, Marketing Consultant at HCC, and I will be facilitating today's session. This series is designed to educate and support leaders who operate in community facilities, affordable housing, catalytic real estate, and impact finance. As you know, this work requires not only vision, but clarity and confidence when navigating complex funding environments. Today's session focuses on a truth many of us know all too well. Capital is never truly free. Every source comes with expectations, reporting requirements, fees, compliance obligations, and long-term relational implications. This webinar is meant to equip you with practical and strategic tools you can use immediately. Throughout the session, you'll learn how to assess alignment, understand the true cost of capital, evaluate trade-offs between funding sources, and identify the governance and staffing readiness needed for successful capital acceptance. If you have questions during today's session, please put those in the Q&A box. I will be monitoring throughout, and we will take questions at the end. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Carrie Sanders, the founder and CEO of Hope Community Capital. Her work is driven by a mission to support equitable, mission-aligned development across the country, which is why this and subsequent webinars are so important to give you the tools needed to make the best decisions for your organization. She brings 20 years of experience in community development finance, and she has played a key role in closing over $1 billion in new market tax credit transactions nationwide. She has advised nonprofits and CDEs nationwide on NMTC, LIHTC, TIF, HUD programs, and other financing tools, and developed and launched successful NMTC programs, bringing deep expertise in structuring capital for community-serving real estate projects. Carrie's background includes strategic planning, public and housing evaluation, re-entry housing, and economic impact analysis. She holds a master's degree in city planning from MIT and dual bachelor's degrees in music and political science from William Jewell College. She has also taught sustainable community development and social innovation at Edgewood College and currently serves as secretary on the board of Rooted and Rising. Carrie's depth of experience, combined with her commitment to community-centered development, makes her the ideal guide for today's conversation. Thank you for taking the time to invest in strengthening your organization's financial strategy and long-term impact. With that, please help me welcome Carrie Sanders.
Thank you, and welcome to our webinar today, the first in a series. I will be taking you through our webinar called Capital Alignment Before You Say Yes to the Money. And I will share my screen now, and we will get this party started, as I like to say. One moment, please. Just a second. All right. As I was saying, let's start by just framing the conversation about why I was so committed to making this webinar happen today for all of you. There's a lot at stake with community development. And when we think about the sort of capital that we can bring together, that we can stack, we can layer, we can understand, we can navigate, it really makes a difference in what outcomes happen in terms of impact. There's a lot at stake. The space you can build, what you can put in that space, the services you can offer, the people you can reach, and ultimately the impact that you can deliver. Our experience and my argument today is that aligned capital, Capital that aligns with the impact you're seeking to create expands your impact, and misaligned capital will constrain it. Also, throughout these slides today, you're going to see various pictures of projects where Hope Community Capital has been honored to be the development advisory consultant and bringing in capital. So I won't necessarily go through each and every project, but just so you know what you're looking at, this is a sample of the type of work that we believe in and that we come alongside with our clients. So, the argument today and what I want to share with you today is that actually capital is not the problem. And when I started Hope Community Capital 10 years ago now, I had the belief that I still have today, which is there is no shortage of capital, financial capital, or any other kind of capital. There is no shortage of capital for high impact projects. There is a shortage of aligned capital. And so, what we hope to do with our clients, and what I hope you learn from today, is how to find aligned capital that will allow you to make the impact that you want to do. And I believe that most of the people in the audience today, and I know that all of our clients are part of our team, and where we advise them is because they face a constraint where they need to expand their real estate footprint, whether it's additional units for vulnerable populations for housing. Maybe it is a community facility providing vital services. But the point of all of that is that our clients need to expand, and to expand, they have to access capital. And without the expansion and without the capital to fund that expansion, they're not able to make the impact that they are called to make. So that is the whole point here. So capital on its own does not create impact, right? You create impact. Your organizations create impact. Capital does not. But capital does create options. So for an example, if we're working with a 100,000 square foot community facility and we find a source of capital that is very concerned about access to early childhood education for lower income families and households, let's see if within our community center we have also a mission to create opportunities for early childhood education for low income communities. If you align yourself with that capital, in my example, you now have an option to serve that need in your community. And so that is the idea. So capital does not create its own impact. You create your own impact, but it does create options for you to expand your impact or to meet the needs of the community, even in a more strong way. Okay. So what capital actually does? So let's start with what it does not, right? It doesn't solve your impact problem, right? So money does not solve a deeply entrenched lack of affordable housing options for vulnerable populations. Capital does not solve the impact problem, and it does not implement the mission of serving, in my example, households in need of permanent supportive housing. But it will expand your choices for how many units you might be able to build, what amenities and connections those units may offer to residents. And it can shape your outcomes. For an example, if you're able to provide permanent supportive housing versus short-term housing, then your outcome is for permanent supportive housing, not short-term. So it can shape that outcome. And it can also influence your constraints. And so we're going to talk about that too. Moving on. I do have to highlight this project here on the left. This is the King Center in Racine, Wisconsin. It was a $65 million plus project where Hope Community Capital was the new market tax credit allocation consultant. And this is over 100,000 square feet of vital community services in a very exciting up and coming part of Racine that is unfortunately very underinvested. And so what you have here is Racine County Public Health, you have a community center, and you have a federally qualified health center as well. So this is an incredible example of many, many layers of public funding, private funding, many grants, tax credits coming in to build a beautiful, high impact project. So capital did a lot for that project. But if you listen to what I said about the different tenants, the tenants are the ones that are solving an impact problem. The tenants and the residents and those who are coming through in and out of those doors day in and day out are implementing the mission of this place. Okay. But that's because they were able to bring about $65 million in capital. So, what is capital for? This is a very important point that I want to bring to you today. And that is that every source of capital is a trade. It is an exchange. So let's use an example of maybe we'll use the King Center, right? We had an opportunity to utilize new market tax credits in that project. With those new market tax credits came obligations, right? So, in exchange for about 20% of the total capital needed to develop that project, we had to accept obligations with that capital. And there are many with new markets. If any of you have used new markets or you're curious about new markets, I'm sure you've heard that it's complicated and that there are many strings attached. Well, when you accept the capital, you also accept the obligations. So one of our arguments here at HCC is that the cost of capital is equal to the obligations you agree to with those capital sources. So the question becomes then for our clients, do those obligations support or constrain your outcomes? Okay. And I'm talking about community impact outcomes. I'm talking short-term outcomes. I'm talking long-term outcomes. I'm talking about affordable housing units. I'm talking about accessible and affordable childcare of quality, and so on and so forth. Do the obligations that come with the capital that you receive constrain or support your community impact outcomes? So the way we look at it here is that we guide our clients to start with the impact, then design the capital. And I am emphasizing the word design. Yes. It is artistic. It is definitely responsive to the designer. Design the capital, but start with the impact you want to create. That's where we want to start. So, what are you trying to achieve impact-wise? Before you start talking to funders, if you can possibly help it, what are you trying to achieve impact-wise? Understand the short-term outcomes, the long-term outcomes, the broader community impact that you want to have with your project, and then begin to design the capital stack that will match that will have the obligations that come with it, that support those short, long-term, and larger community engagement impacts. Based on your vision for impact, how does that then inform the type and terms of capital needed? On the right side of my slide, a little blurry, but this is a phenomenal project where we hosted at Hope Community Capital our Invest Forward day-long symposium on bringing capital to projects. And this project here is a $14 million a new construction of the Urban Ecology Center in Washington Park in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we worked alongside the Urban Ecology Center, many sources within the 14 million. And we started right from the get-go to learn and understand and hold fidelity to in every single funding conversation. What are the short-term outcomes? What are the long-term outcomes? And what is the community impact, broadly speaking, of this Urban Ecology Center? From there, they were able to design a capital stack that really reinforced those outcomes and that impact. So there are some key questions that I would like to suggest to you as you consider designing, once again, your capital stack, okay? So how do we want to use this space? How do we want to use this space? Are we going to have, in the case here, this is the Milwaukee Youth Arts Center. This space is used for much programming, much diverse programming around the arts, as diverse as you can think. And it is adaptive reuse of a building into an arts center. And they renovated it again after having renovated it the first time. The second time was about 3 or 4 years ago. And they envisioned great changes for this space where they could have more outcomes and more reach into Milwaukee communities with the arts. So they were driving outcomes around that. That's bullet number two. And then understanding too, if you can possibly think about it at the early capital design stage, what would distract from your mission? And if a capital source comes along and it becomes a distraction to that mission, that may be a signal that that capital is not needing to be designed into your capital stack. What what capital would come along and amplify the good work that is happening at your project? For the Milwaukee Youth Arts Center, they needed more rehearsal space. They needed more Americans with Disability Act accessibility. They needed more meeting space for the after school program and many more outcomes. And so when they had that in mind and it was clear, they were able to reach to specific capital sources that would amplify those goals. Okay. So your real estate is a strategy. And I am speaking, of course, from my seat over here at Hope Community Capital, in that, again, most of our clients are nonprofit, mission-based organizations that have to expand in order to meet the needs and desires of the community that they are there to serve, okay, with their mission. And so they can use their real estate as a strategy to make more impact, right? So you know this, but your real estate can be a way to deliver more vital services, right? It can be a community gathering place. It can be a revenue generator for your mission. It could be a partnership hub. All of these right here and many, many more are actual outcomes and ways that our clients have actually used their space. For an example, we have a picture here, which is the Notre Dame School of Milwaukee. We've worked with them several times over the years. Phenomenal outcomes for their students, I have to say. But at their St. Florian campus, which is their boys' middle school, they really needed more space for students to meet their enrollment. And they also became a community gathering space as well, given the campus and what was on it. And it did become a hub for partnerships as well. So all this to say, which is that bottom line on this slide right here, your capital must match your intent. Okay. So my idea again for these few slides was your space, your impact can be very, very clear. And from there, you can design a capital stack. You. And when I say you, I am really talking about project sponsors right now. That's really who I'm speaking to when I say design your capital stack as well. So before you say yes to the money, right? Before you say yes to the obligations, the strings attached that may come with various public or private or anything in between funding sources, I want you to ask another question. Can you live with the capital and the obligations thereof for the full term of the deal? Because it's a long-term relationship. So let me just give you a couple examples. For a project that's accessing low-income housing tax credits, you have a minimum commitment of 15 years. But typically, we're looking at a land use restriction agreement or a LURA for 30 years, meaning that whatever is developed on this property is going to be affordable and it runs with the land. Okay. So that is accepting in a low income housing tax credit deal. Let's say it's a 9% low income housing tax credit deal. In simple terms, we're talking about 60, maybe 65% of the total project cost, coming with a minimum 30-year obligation. So that's one example. New markets tax credits, that's 7 years of a compliance period. Can you live with the capital for the full term of the deal? And how do we know if we can live with it? Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes. But Thinking about it from a financial perspective, there's fees and things that happen year in and year out to support that funding and that capital in the deal. Operationally, can you meet the hurdles of the operational requirements? Missionally, can you maintain, sustain, and even grow what you promised at the closing of that capital? Did you promise 100 seats for early childhood education students? Can you maintain that? So I do have a question for the audience, and I think that you can respond in the Q&A. But I do have a question, and it is, what is one funding source that you've said yes to that turned out to be more complicated than expected? Okay. And I don't know, Jana, if people have any responses there.
There are no current responses in the Q&A box. Actually, I see one now. Historic tax credits.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So speaking to the can you live with the capital for the full term? So with historic tax credits, we're talking about 5 years once the credit funds, right? What about leading up to that? Some projects that we've had the honor of working alongside that have used historic tax credits have been preparing for the tax credit closing for 2 to 3 years leading to that. And then there becomes some little wrinkles, right, about what entity can actually accept these credits. Do I need a bridge financing, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a great example with historic tax credits because it is so much more than just saying, thank you so much. I will be using that historic tax credit equity to offset some of the cost to renovate this property to the standards of the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office. Thank you very much. It is not that at all, is it? It is quite the journey. It is quite the journey. Jana?
We had a few more in there for you.
Okay.
The funding source that they said yes to and turned out to be complicated, new markets, and then also the Housing Trust Fund income affordability and perpetuity.
Uh-huh. Okay. So what reading into that, yes, they're complicated and both of those. And what we have experienced with our clients too is that when you have different sources, such as historic, such as housing trust fund, such as new market tax credits, perhaps even stacked in or among each other in the same project, understanding not only the complication of each standalone capital source, but how they interact, how they interact. And one thing I would just say is that no question is too big or too small when you are navigating any of those sources. And I always prefer to view, for an example, with the housing trust fund. I view, the public sector employee that's maybe administering that program or whatever. I prefer to consider them part of the team, meaning they are the expert on housing trust fund, and I am not, if I'm a project using it for the first time to expand my impact. And I bring them on in my mind and really in my email as part of the team because they also want, right? They want their capital to be successfully utilized. They have impact too that is tied to their capital, and they are entrusting you, and you are accepting that and trusting to make those outcomes happen. So that's just one tip. But yes, those are all complicated sources, and especially when they work in and among each other. Okay. So this is why, though, back to this point again, this is why, once again, alignment matters. Capital providers, they influence decisions over time, right? And every capital source comes with expectations. And I think some of the points that were just raised in the Q&A about complicated funding sources, yes, they all have expectations. Especially for, well, I think all of the funding sources that we work with expect an outcome, right? And so for the project sponsor, you have to think to yourself, am I aligned with? Can I reach to, or does that align perfectly right now to the impact that I anticipate making here? And can I project that impact happening for the life of my relationship with this funding source? Okay. All right. Um, let's continue on here. So, keys to getting capital right. Um, so how do we speak to, I'm speaking to the sponsors right now, the project sponsors right now, and those who support project sponsors who are on the call. What I want to say to you as a project sponsor looking for capital and navigating capital stacks is a few things. I am encouraging you greatly to know your project financials better than anyone else. You cannot rely on the funding source to untangle, to understand your project financials. You have to understand your project financials so well that you could give a TED talk on it without any preparation. And that's kind of my test. I know that sounds a little silly, but if someone said, "Tell me about your project financials with some depth and some detail," and this somebody happened to be, I don't know, a tax credit investor, a trust fund, so on and so forth, would you know your project financials so well that you know how well aligned your project is with their capital, and they don't have to be wondering, does this project sponsor really understand the project budget? Do they really understand their operations? And do they really have the wherewithal to handle the obligations of this capital for the compliance period? You can solve that pretty quickly by knowing your project financials inside and out. And by you, I mean anyone who is involved from the project sponsor side in getting this project done. And that means, I mean, I could name a few, but it means not only the project manager or the project staff or program staff, it also means the CEO and the CFO. And it really doesn't hurt at all to have a couple people on the board that understand the project financials very, very well. Then you want to make sure that you understand the structure of the capital and how it works with your project, right? So that goes back to my first point about designing the capital stack. Okay, so when we're designing that capital stack, let's talk about a call that I've fielded here in recent days, which is I received a call and they were wondering if we could do new market tax credits and low-income housing tax credits in the same project because that would solve our capital stack, right? Well, something that I know is that new market tax credits cannot finance the same footprint as low-income housing tax credits, okay? You cannot fund literally the same square foot with both sources layered upon each other. You could do a condo with LIHTC over here and new markets over here, but you can never have them together. And so that was a conversation where the potential project sponsor was learning about the structure of the capital and how it would work with their project because they had a project that could use new markets and they could use low-income housing tax credits, but they simply could not be structured on top of each other. Okay. Understanding the strings attached. This is getting a little bit redundant, but I think it's so important that I just have to state it again. You've got to know what all those obligations are. Let's take for a grant agreement. One of the main things that we've run into recently with our projects is that different sources of public funding that will come in together on a project will have different hurdles and different timelines that don't usually correspond that well. So, for example, if I'm working with a municipality and I need to get my zoning permitted, I need to get my building permit, I need to get my plans approved, not in that order, plans approved. But then I've got a funding source, let's say on the state level, that says like, no, I need all of this finalized within 4 months of the award letter, where the city municipality process might take 10 months. How do those strings attached, right? Those obligations, those hurdles around timing, just capital sequencing, if you want to use a fancy word, how can they work together? How can they work together? So it's not just like strings attached, but it's making sure that those strings do not get entangled into a big ball that you can't untangle. Okay. Knowing what the capital requires, I learn the grant agreement or the investment agreement or the loan agreement. I read that and I do not skim it. And also our clients don't. We insist that you can't just have your consultant reading these things because your consultant is not obligated to those requirements. You, as the project sponsor, are obligated to those requirements. And so know them very well. All of those agreements, know them very, very well. Know what it takes to access the funding. So, like with the historic tax credit example, right? You have to have some draws before you can access the credit period. And so you've got to understand what it takes to access it. I'm thinking about low-income housing tax credits. We've got several milestones that the tax credit investor requires before you can access various tranches of that capital. Even though it's been promised, there's still things that have to be unlocked before, or milestones to be hit before you can access it. And then what it takes to unwind it. Now, we have run into this in our past 10 years as a company. We run into this more than once, which is that sometimes nonprofit leadership changes in and among the compliance period. So, for example, if we had a new market tax credit that closed under one executive leadership and one board leadership and one program staff, and then 7 years later, it's time to unwind that new market tax credit deal. And we have a whole new team. We've got some new board members and so on and so forth. What does it take to unwind it? What I want to encourage you, and I believe the leadership expert Stephen Covey would agree with me, is to begin with the end in mind. And I would say close with the unwind in mind. Okay? Close with the unwind in mind. This is going to make life much easier as as a project who is bringing in lots of different sources of capital. Okay, let's see here. Come on. All right. So the true cost of capital, right? We talked about the true cost of capital being the total obligations that come along with that capital. We're talking about compliance requirements. We're talking about reporting burdens. Many of these things have monthly, annual, quarterly reporting requirements for several years. Do you have the staff capacity now or into the future, or do you need to hire a professional advisor to help you with this requirement? Think about fees over time. Capital is not free. Capital is not free. So, what are the fees over time for the capital source? Restrictions on use, and if there would be any loss of flexibility in what you aim to do as an organization because of the capital you accepted years ago. Okay, we're going to keep moving. So, capital really is not just money, right? It is a claim. So, I want to give an example. Many of you, if you're from the state of Wisconsin, and maybe there's some outside of Wisconsin that have these programs, but we have a program, we have had a couple rounds of a program in Wisconsin called the Non-State Grant. And it's a wonderful program, and it invests in high quality, high impact projects across the state. So part of the requirements, even the application, I remember reading this, and it's the very last bullet point, and it said that they would need to have some sort of claim on something in the project in exchange for the capital, right? The grant. Sometimes that could be a mortgage. It could be having some control over the asset financed, restrictions on use, approval rights. I think we're kind of out of the ARPA funding era at this point, but we did have many projects that were able to utilize ARPA. And I thought that was a wonderful use of ARPA as well, creating great significant impact. But they needed a claim on, and in some cases it was a mortgage or a lien position on part of the property being financed using ARPA. Even if ARPA wasn't the full capital stack, would there be some part of the building or the real estate that could be pledged as part of the ARPA requirements? So these are important things to know, but it's a trade, right? It's an exchange. You're accepting capital, but you're also accepting those obligations. The other thing I wanted to point out, or several other things I wanted to point out, is that, what happens if things change? What happens if things change? You take the capital and, something happens, the no longer your services are no longer perhaps being reimbursed. Maybe there's volatility with public policy, federal policy, so on and so forth. Maybe leadership changes. Maybe the neighborhood or the community no longer needs the services that you have a mission to provide. These things do happen. And what happens then? What happens with that real estate that you financed with, half a dozen different sources of capital, the capital stack that you designed to help amplify your impact? Well, there's some clawbacks. There's clawback provisions where the funders can literally claw back those funds if not used the way they had intended. There is a reversion clause. For an example, if a municipality provides some funding for a project, they're providing funding for a specific project that has specific outcomes. Maybe it's a farmer's market. Maybe it is, again, back to childcare. The city or the municipality is seeking those impacts. But let's say that real estate stops doing that. Well, then it would revert back to the capital source. And so we call those reversion clauses and other things. So what happens if your assumptions at closing don't hold? And this is a question I want us to ask before we close on the financing, to say, what if our assumptions about our mission, our growth, our revenue, our ability to service this debt, our ability to service these obligations, what if that doesn't hold? What if that changes? Please ask yourself that as you're designing capital. Okay. Okay. So again, key questions on how to evaluate capital. I'm excited about the project on the screen right there too. That's the Urban League of Greater Madison's Black Business Hub, located here at HCC headquarters here in Madison, Wisconsin. And this project was just the result of the vision of the community and wonderful leadership at the Urban League of Greater Madison. These are the kind of questions why I put this picture here, is because these are the questions that we asked as a development team almost weekly. No kidding. What are the requirements of the capital here? I mean, we had I don't think I'm exaggerating one bit when I say we had at least 10 different public and private sources in here. And by private, I mean like the large capital campaign as well is one of those sources. What are the requirements of that? What are the trade-offs? If we take this capital source and we don't take that, what are the trade-offs? How do the various sources, and I said at least 10 in this one, how do the various sources interact? What are the risks of compliance, of non-completion? How do we understand our risks as a project sponsor to make sure that we can comply with these capital requirements? Do we, as an organization who's developing real estate, have the capacity to do this work, both up to closing, through construction, into operations, into the compliance period? Do we have the capacity? And if we don't, it's not a non-starter. It's just, how do we design a project where we have the capacity to take on this kind of financing? Okay. So, are you ready for the capital? Some more questions. We're going to keep going though. So one pro tip that I wanted to share with you is that I am encouraging projects that are seeking capital to RFP for capital. I'm sure many of you have responded to requests for proposals or RFPs, or responded to requests for qualifications for maybe project bidding or so on and so forth. But what if the project put out an opportunity to funders to respond to their project? And in this request for proposals, the project can list who they are. I'm talking mission, impact, excitement for short-term and long-term outcomes, community impact, and so on. What is needed in terms of financial capital? What the capital will accomplish. So that's that impact again, right? and where there is flexibility. Have you ever thought about like saying, we're accepting responses to be part of our designed capital stack? This is what we're looking for. And being able to say, I know what I'm looking for my capital stack means that you understand the project financials in great detail. You understand how much it's going to cost to build this project, you understand how much it's going to cost to operate it, and you understand the obligations of taking various sorts of capital and what that cost means to not only the project itself, but truly to the organization. Okay. So this is just a slide, and we will have this on our research resource page as well. But this is just about how we suggest that you approach investors. And when I say investors, I mean all manner of capital sources. Okay, that's what I mean by investors. But again, being clear about your vision, showing them how your capital will contribute to the ends, right? The mission, showing investors what you need financially to realize this vision. Ask for what you need. You got to know what you need. You got to know what you need. And yes, budgets are dynamic and things change and we have different influences on our budget, but you as a project sponsor have to know it better than anyone, better than anyone. And then produce that RFP, produce a prospectus to see what investors would like to respond to your wonderful opportunity for investment. And structuring matters too. So depending on how you're going to utilize your real estate as an asset, there's many different ways that you can approach once you've built the thing, how you are going to operate it. And of course, we have to project how it's going to operate in order to get the capital to even build it in the first place. So I just have a few there, but I'm going to keep moving. And then my couple last slides here, and then I just want to make sure that we have some time, Jana, for questions from the audience. But this is really a checklist before pursuing and accepting alternative capital. And why I'm talking about alternative capital is because that truly, I mean, that is the world that Hope Community Capital swims in with our clients, right? We're not talking necessarily about market rate debt and equity. Okay, that's not really what we're talking about. That's not why HCC is here. That's probably why that's not why you're here either. We're talking about all those um, interesting public and private funding sources and philanthropic too. All that impact capital, we can call it. So understanding, of course, all the strings attached. And I gave you a few tips throughout this webinar to kind of give you some tips on how to understand those quote unquote obligations or strings attached. Gotta begin with the unwind in mind. There's a little rhyme for you. Begin with the unwind in mind. And know that, yeah, things shift all the time. So what happens at the end of the compliance period most certainly will be different than what things look like at closing for sure. Making sure you understand the expectations of the investor. And I mentioned earlier in our webinar, we got capital sequencing issues. We've got hurdles that we have to go for this capital source and milestones for this one. How do they work together? How do they work together? Any indemnification requirements, meaning if you make a mistake, you will be holding someone else, maybe an investor, harmless. You will indemnify them. Considering your trade-offs between the capital sources. Some capital sources do not work well with others. Just ask. Just ask. Understand the full cost of capital as soon as you can. And that is, in simple terms, right, the cost of the obligations that come with that capital, the full, true cost of that. Understanding what staffing capacity you have and what is required to successfully accept and manage, and I would say comply with that capital. And understand the relationship and the people and how you will be communicating with, I gave an example, with the trust fund, and making sure that they understand because they're a capital source and they're very important to whether, how, and to what extent your project makes the impact that it seeks to make, how you're going to communicate and how they can be part of this team. Okay. So just a couple of final thoughts, and then Jana, we're going to go to questions. So not all capital moves your mission forward. And you as a project sponsor know this more than anyone. You know it intimately. You know what capital is going to be aligned. But I think it is it is illuminating and it is freeing for one to think, yeah, not all capital is going to move this mission forward, and that's okay. Every capital decision that you make is an exchange, it's a trade. You are accepting capital and you are going to be then trading time. You'll be trading your resources in order to accept that capital. There's always a trade-off. And then, most importantly, before you say yes to that money, you want to make sure it aligns. And that's why I started this whole webinar talking about making sure you understand the impact you wish to achieve with your project. There's a little bonus tip here if you made it through this far, and that is that how the money comes in and goes out from your project can really be a burden, or it can be very, very smooth. How that gets done, the money coming in, the money coming out of your project, matters deeply in how much impact you can receive. And so this is something that you want to get set up right away. Disbursement, that's just money going out for the purposes that you said you would use it, is paying draw requests and so on and so forth, and receiving it. How that happens can be very costly, but it can also be very smooth. So that's just a bonus tip to think about. Okay, I would love to open this up for any questions, Janet. It looks like we have about 10 minutes.
Okay, sounds great. We do have a few questions, and I do want to point out as well that you will get the video after this is done. It will get emailed to you from the Zoom webinar link, but we will also be posting it on our resource page. So, Kira, we do have a few questions. I'm going to go ahead and read this first one for you. So one of our participants is looking at a sale leaseback with bonds incentive with our local port authority to help fund one of the redevelopments that we are pursuing NMTC with HCC. Does HCC have any experience with sale leaseback with bonds? I don't know a whole lot about the structuring, so just have some questions about that tool. Can HCC help with us?
Um, I can't say that I have worked on sale leaseback with bonds. Certainly have used bonds to finance things. Certainly have used them kind of not necessarily right on top of new market tax credits, but certainly in the same project. So yes, we can help, but it would be a matter of understanding, and you can do this too, all of us can, understanding, again, what are the requirements for the bonds? What do we mean exactly by sale leaseback? What does that mean exactly to your project and the obligations of whomever is selling or leasing back the property? We did have a project up on the slides previously that created a specific entity to receive the new market tax credits and all other kinds of public funding in support of kind of a single asset LLC. And that was the project, and it was an affiliate of the parent company. That affiliate of the parent company did lease back to the parent. And so there was a lease between the single purpose entity that developed the property and brought in all of these different capital sources and the parent organization. So we do have some experience with that. And certainly, I think in our portfolio, we've definitely seen bonds working in new market tax credits, not necessarily stacked on top of each other or leveraged if you're into the new market tax credit parlance, but working to get the project done. But yeah, we would be happy to look into that with you in a deeper way. Next.
Excellent. We have another question. What are the signs that an organization is not actually ready to take on a particular capital source, even if the project itself is strong?
Mm-hmm. So I think the biggest sign for me is when we don't have a clear picture of how much the project is going to cost, and we don't have a clear picture of how the project is going to operate. So we don't have a capital stack, a construction budget, a hard cost budget, a development budget, you can call it what you want, and we don't have a strong sense of projections based on any facts, right? And all projects start with, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how this is going to operate. I'm not sure how this capital is going to stack, if you will, but we refine it. But it needs to be very refined before it goes to an actual investor. Actual investor. So one of our strategies is that we want to underwrite the project for the investor. Now, of course, the investor has to underwrite it themselves. You have to, peel through the funding application and push through on some of the assumptions on the budget and the pro forma. We understand that. But we want to have done that well ahead and have stressed that well ahead before submitting to the capital provider. So again, if we don't know how much it's really going to cost and we don't know how it's really going to operate, given some stress testing, then we're not ready for capital.
Excellent. We have a couple more questions, and if we can't get to all of them today, we will send out answers to these as
Yep.
well after.
Mhm.
What separates projects that successfully close from those whose projects stall?
Mhm. So a couple things. Projects that successfully close, first off, let's define success. For HCC, success is that as much capital as possible goes to the project so that the project can create as much impact as they want to, right? We want to get as much to the project as possible. So that is a success. So when they successfully close, that tells me that there hasn't been a lot of erosion, if you will, of that benefit over time, right? There is still a good chunk of that tax credit that has not been taken away by various fees or time or shifts in pricing of materials. It hasn't happened because we've held fast to a development timeline. We've 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 structured each milestone in terms of what we need to get done to access that capital. We've done it very simply, very straightforwardly, and there hasn't been a lot of, I'm not sure. That creates a lot of time delays. The other thing is that there are delays that are outside of the project sponsor's choice. So, for example, if materials are shifting a lot, which we had, earlier in 2025 when we were kind of navigating tariff approaches and things, this is out of the sponsor's control. Okay. We have had some stalling of funds that we thought would be available for our project, but then they were not dispersed timely, whatever, that we had expected. So, a project that can navigate that and as we say in the finance world, pencils down sometimes when we know that moving forward is just going to be eroding benefit because there are things outside of our control that are stalling a project. Knowing when to hold them, put the pencil down is key to getting a project to close. Those are a couple things I would say.
Well, thank you. If you've already said yes to the capital that might not be fully aligned, what's the first step to getting back into alignment?
Well, we have a little phrase here at Hope Community Capital, and it's called communication is kindness. And so I think the first thing to do is get the facts about, okay, I did not understand that these were the obligations or the strings attached with this when I showed interest. I have reviewed it in more depth, and perhaps our project has also changed. Our project goals have changed. And I think if you can communicate it honestly, candidly, simply, and as soon as possible, you are going to go far because, as one of my slides says, not every source of capital is going to be aligned. And so communication is kindness. Yes.
All right, last question. We're evaluating a funding source right now that looks incredibly attractive on the surface. What are some of the less obvious costs we should be looking for beyond the interest rate or grant amount?
Mhm. Well, again, one thing that I said earlier, and I want to say it again, is keep in mind the unwind. Okay. So unwinds are not free generally, right? And by unwind, I mean when the capital is done. Okay. So, and this applies really to any source of capital, any tenor of capital, so on and so forth. But how are we going to get out of this? How will we know that this capital is done? And is there a cost when the capital is done? So, for an example, new markets tax credits, right? There is an unwind event at year 7. Okay. Um, you might want to budget for that. You might want to budget for that, both in terms of timing, like who's going to manage this unwind at the nonprofit or the organization, and also in terms of fees for legal. Do we want to accrue some fees to cover the anticipated unwind? That's one that I would just surface to start. And then secondly, look at those reporting obligations. Not all capital has reporting obligations, but most does. Not all of it is, a lot of time consuming, but some of it is. And for those that have reporting requirements, such as a community benefits agreement, such as a community impact report, these are all things that our clients manage year in and year out that come with capital. Understanding who's going to do that, and if you're going to need to get some advisory to help with that, budget for that. But think about like, what is my ongoing timing obligation around reporting? And when you have 10 plus sources, what reporting could you double up and say, hey, can I just give you the same report I give to this one, so on and so forth. But those are just a couple that I would really invite you to think about as you're thinking about um, what is the true cost of capital, even though it's attractive on the surface.
Excellent. That ends the questions that we had in the post. I just wanted to thank Kiri for giving us an amazing talk today. This is beneficial definitely for any business that is looking at capital and how to make that high impact project move forward. I want to thank everyone today for joining us. As I mentioned, the webinar will be posted on our resource page on our website, and you will also be sent this at the close of the session. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.